Hi, it's Dr. Fox, licensed psychologist in the state of Texas. And in this video, we're going to talk about what makes a good relationship. And I think this is really important, particularly for individuals along the BPD spectrum, but also for a lot of individuals. Relationships are very challenging for many of us. And there are 5 components that we're going to go over in this video that can help you increase your level of insight into your relationships and help you provide a degree of assessment as to what aspects perhaps you want to work on and what you need to change. So the 5 aspects include open communication, listening and feeling heard, working through disagreements, talk openly about emotional and physical desires, and trust self and other. So these 5 components, we're going to go over each one at a time. So please like, share, and subscribe, and let's get to it. So let's first talk about open communication. Now, open communication entails sharing our true feelings with our partner. And when I say partner, you can even broaden this out to a child, to your parents, to whomever it may be. And open communication can be really frightening for a lot of folks who have a traumatic past, who have had partners that are along the narcissistic spectrum, or other partners who perhaps are very judging or harsh with your communication, right? When you try to talk with them or convey your concerns or thoughts, a lot of times they're shutting you down, they're stonewalling you, things of that nature. So that open communication, what we want to do is we want to certainly convey our thoughts and our feelings, but in a way that it builds trust. This can also be utilized to recognize, is your partner a good listener? Are they hearing that open communication, or does it seem like that they're waiting for that one slip up or that one statement where then they can pounce on you? And if that's the case, it's really important to start to talk about the value of open communication, because if you're hiding a lot of your thoughts and feelings from your partner, after a while, I believe that you start to sense it and they start to sense it, and that builds up a wall between you and them. And if you're an individual along the BPD spectrum, what this does is it validates that BPD. It validates that internalized sense of distrust of others, but also adds to the confusion of self. So that open communication, what we want to do is we want to be able to convey our thoughts clearly. So sometimes we have to take a moment, think it through, and say, okay, what am I trying to say? And what am I hoping will be the outcome here? And that's part of that open communication, is we have to think about, if we're going to have this communication, what do I hope to get out of it? And we have to be realistic too. We can't hope that, you're going to say, I love you, for example, and your partner's going to say, I love you too. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Does that mean they'll never love you? No. Does that mean that they hate you and want to discard you? No. So there's a lot of different factors that we need to consider. But that open communication is one of those foundational components in relationships that we have to evaluate and consider. Now, the next area that we're going to focus on is listening and feeling heard. Now, this is really, really important and also part of open communication. So all of these kind of build on one another, right? So listening and feeling heard is that recognition that in these healthy relationships where both people feel comfortable bringing up issues, about expressing yourself and listening to the other person's concerns. And sometimes that's really, really hard, particularly for individuals along the BPD spectrum, but also if you're in a relationship with someone who's along the narcissistic spectrum, that can be difficult too. Because again, when you're trying to listen, but also trying to feel heard, it can be very confusing, because in many ways, you're not only defensive and guarded, but you are not listening, usually rehearsing. And rehearsing is the opposite of what we want to do here. You don't want to rehearse. And rehearsing is, so your partner says something to you like, oh, I had this and this and this happen today, and I felt this and this and this. And you're thinking, oh, well, all right, so this happened to me, and that was similar to that, so I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to make sure that I talk about this. But you're not listening. And I think that if we're not listening, and it's hard for your partner to feel heard, I think it's hard for them to also listen to you and provide some feedback where you feel heard as well. And I think a way to communicate listening and feeling heard is that you focus in on and you really touch on the other person's feelings, their needs and values in what they're talking about. Perhaps they felt sad. Perhaps they felt rejected. Perhaps they felt fearful. Perhaps they felt anxious or nervous or excited or happy or enthusiastic, whatever it may be. But it's finding those things. What's the emotional component in the theme that your partner is talking about? And again, partner doesn't necessarily mean a romantic partner, right? It can also be your child. It can also be your parent. So it's important to recognize that. Allowing someone to feel listened to and heard is really, really important. The next component that we're going to talk about is working through disagreements. This can be really, really difficult, particularly if you're in a relationship with someone with a personality disorder, or if you yourself have some BPD traits, or if you qualify for borderline personality disorder. Disagreements can be really, really activating and triggering. And it's important to realize that conflict is in every relationship. And sometimes individuals, and in my clients, I've noticed those along the BPD spectrum hold this idea that they're not supposed to have arguments or disagreements in their relationships, that everything is just supposed to be wonderful, beautiful, and we always get along and we always understand each other and we always have open communication and we always listen and we always feel heard. But that isn't really the reality, because the reality is that people are constantly changing. People are constantly growing. And hopefully in your relationships, you're growing together. You're going to encounter disagreements. And we have to fight fair in relationships. So knowing that conflict is normal, so it's important to build that into your expectation. But it's how you engage and disengage in disagreements that's really important. So if you find that you're discussing a topic in a heated manner, a disagreement, for, let's say, more than 3 minutes, you're probably not arguing anymore, whatever the supposed issue is. Now it's about the relationship. What is it that is causing this disagreement to continue for 3 minutes or more? What is this really about? And it's getting to that central issue that can be so, so important. Really hard to do, because once you're both engaged, in many ways, it becomes a power struggle. And it's that, well, I'm not going to let him or her get this, or I'm not going to let, them or they, win on this one, or this, that, back and forth. So what happens is if you're in that power struggle and you're in that middle of your disagreement, now it's about pride. Now it's about the relationship. It's about winning. And the problem is, if your relationship is based on beating your partner and winning, the only real way to win is to decimate your partner. By decimating your partner, you make them feel broken, bad, shameful, sometimes guilty, sometimes inferior, all of these issues. And it exacerbates all of the negative issues that are going on in your relationship. We have to remember that you and your partner, or that other individual, that there's going to be differences. You're going to have differences in beliefs and values. And that's a good thing, because you can learn about different aspects of life. And that's what we want to do. That's what we want to learn about. So we have to work through these disagreements and really be sure to take notice when our pride gets caught up in them, when it becomes that power struggle, because that's when we need to disengage. And I think that it's okay to set up a rule with your partner to say, each of us should be allowed to say timeout. And that timeout is that you recognize that it's getting heated and you're going to be like, whoa, timeout. I think we both need to just separate for a little bit, cool down, maybe go for a run, go for a walk, go for a swim, play with your dogs, play with your cats, birds, whatever you got going on. But separate and then allow your head to clear a little bit. Don't use alcohol. Don't use drugs. That is just going to make things even worse, because that is going to cut down on your ability to manage your behaviors and your thoughts, and you're going to get more amped up. And then you are more likely to get caught up in that power struggle, get caught up with that pride. So we want to work through those disagreements. Next, we want to talk about mutual intimacy. Now, intimacy doesn't always mean that it is romantic. Now, certainly in romantic relationships, we want to allow enough space for mutual respect, for intimacy and connections. So in romantic relationships, we want to make sure that we feel comfortable to express our wants and needs, as well as that we're willing to listen to our partner's wants and needs as well. And I think that when we don't do that and we can't talk openly about our desires, our interests, things of that nature, again, it builds up that wall. That goes back to that open communication. It goes back to that listening and feeling heard. And it can certainly add to a disagreement. So that mutual intimacy, if in the romantic aspect, can really be problematic. And in many ways, sex can be a barometer for the health of your relationship. Doesn't mean that it's everything, that everything's based on it. But our ability to connect with our partner can sometimes be indicative of how comfortable we are with one another, about our ability to connect with our partner, to feel open, to express how we feel about them, to want them to feel good, for them to help us feel good too. So it's important to consider that as well. What about intimacy in non-romantic relationships? Now, this is about expressing your wants, your desires, and your interests for that individual. It is not romantic, even though I said desires in there, but it's also, for them to do well, or for them to behave in a certain way, or respond in a certain way, or to not respond if you're talking to them about a topic that might be particularly intense. So that non-romantic intimacy is really important too, because it's about exposing yourself a little bit. It's about showing a bit of vulnerability, and know that you're not going to be taken advantage of. Know that you're not going to be attacked for showing that vulnerability. Because if you are and it's present, and this component also relates to the romantic relationships too, because if it's present, then that adds to that inability to work through your disagreements. You don't have open communication. You're not listening. You don't feel heard. And then you're more likely to get into those power struggles. And those power struggles, we know, adds to pride, which just amps up those issues and concerns. And it takes away that sense of intimacy that helps relationships grow and develop. And what we want to do in relationships is we want to grow together. And the next component is a central component to that. And this is trust. It's really important that we are able to trust our partner, but also it's important that we're able to trust ourselves. And I think that this is where individuals along the BPD spectrum really struggle. Because of that common issue that a lot of folks along the BPD spectrum experience, it's that unstable self-image. And how do you trust yourself if you don't really know who you are? That can be really, really difficult. And if you can't trust yourself, you can't trust anyone else. And then sometimes the expectation is external. And when it's external, it's that, well, when you trust me, then I'll know what trust is. And that'll help define my own sense of trust so that I can then trust you, and then you'll be able to trust me, so I'll have a better understanding when we trust one another. And if that's confusing, that's because that is confusing. And imagine that in a relationship, right? All relationships are fluid, right? Nothing is static. Just because you have a good day today doesn't mean you're going to have a good day in your relationships forever, right? We know that. But we have to realize that sense of trust and not knowing ourselves adds a level of confusion and uncertainty and instability in our relationships that is very problematic and takes away from all 5 of these healthy components that we're talking about. And these are those foundational components. So I want to encourage you to develop a positive support system. I want you to get to know yourself as best you can, understand that sense of trust, and listen to your gut. What does your gut say? Not that BPD pathological side, or that narcissistic partner side, or that narcissistic component, or that negative side of self that is telling you to be destructive, harmful, cheat on your partner, whatever it may be. But that part of you that drives you to do well, to succeed, to be compassionate, to be a good listener, to be willing to work through your disagreements, to have that sense of open communication with your partner. These are those central things that all of us, whether you have a personality disorder or traits or not, are working on. Relationships are complicated and they're difficult. And I hope that going over these 5 things were helpful for you. So please check out my channel. Please subscribe to it. That would be great. Please like it. Please comment. And I will see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.